Hi Year 5. So this is the science lesson. It's going to be in two parts. So hopefully you've had a look at the first part of the PowerPoint with the key vocabulary, a little bit about gravity, a little bit about Galileo Galilei, gravity and falling. The other slide was about on the moon. So obviously there's no air, so there's not going to be any air resistance because this lesson's all about air resistance. You should have had a little look at helpful and unhelpful air resistance. So it can be unhelpful sometimes if you're on a bike and you're trying to get up the hill and it's pushing against you and it's slowing you down. But then it can be helpful when we have a parachute involved. Obviously we want some air resistance when we've got our parachute because that makes people fall safely and slowly. Okay, so we still have gravity pulling us down, but it slows us down. So that's why we have our parachutes. And that takes me to today, our little investigation. We're going to pretend that we have the Super Skydiving Company want us to redesign a parachute for them. They want to make sure that it allows somebody to fall from an airplane safely and slowly. And what we have to do is we have to try and find the best design for their new perfect parachute, basically. So what we're going to do is I am going to make 3 parachutes. If you've got some things at home, maybe you can give it a little try as well. You don't have to, but we can do it together here as well. Obviously, if we were in class, each group would be doing this all together. But never mind, we'll just do what we can. And then what we're going to do is we're going to observe which parachute falls the slowest, because if it falls the slowest, then that means we're going to land safely onto the ground. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk to you about is something called variables, because when we're doing science, we're going to do it as a fair test, so we're going to talk about variables. Now, the variables are the things that change as we're doing our investigation. Okay, so you might want to change the material the parachute is made from, the actual object that's attached to the parachute. So you might want to use a Lego figure, a paperclip, a piece of plasticine. It can be anything. Okay, so you might change the object. You might change the shape of the parachute. So you might want to investigate a round shape, a square shape, a triangle shape, and see if that makes a difference. The size of the parachute, so you might have a small, medium and large. The length of the string that's attaching it to your character, so you might have long, medium, short string, see if that makes a difference. And then actually the height of the drop. So there's lots of things that we can actually change. But in today's experiment, we are going to have a look at the material, okay? But before we move on to that as well, there's other variables that we need to think about. So we have the independent variable, which you're going to write on your sheet in a little bit. So that's the thing that we're going to change. Now, I've already said to you that we're going to change the material. So here you would write, right, we're going to change the material. So we're going to use, what I have here is I'm going to use paper. I'm going to use a bit of plastic, which is just a bag, and I'm going to use some fabric or cloth, which is just a cloth that I've cut up from my kitchen. Okay, so they're the 3 different materials that we're going to use. So that's our independent variable. That's what we're going to change every time. Okay. Then we have our dependent variables. What are we going to measure? So the dependent variable, what we're going to do today, when we drop our parachute, we're going to measure the time it takes from when we release it to when it hits the ground. So we're going to measure how long, the duration it takes to fall. Okay, so that's what we're going to do with that one as well. So the other thing that we need to think about is the control. Sorry, I need my sheet back again. So the control is right at the bottom. I don't know if you can see it. The control is basically the things that we have to keep the same. We have to keep it the same. Okay, so on all three, I'm going to keep the string exactly the same length. So let me show you. I've already started cutting here. So the strings, plural, that I'm going to use to attach, they're all exactly the same length. So then it's going to be a fair test. A fair test. Also, I don't know if you noticed, the different materials I've used, I've cut them so that they're all exactly the same size, because then it will be a fair test. Also, the figure that I'm using, this is all I could find, one of Ava's Peppa Pigs, so that's going to be the person who's falling from the parachute, but I need to use the same thing every time. So you might use a paper clip, you might use a lump of plasticine, but you have to use the same one every time so that it is a fair test, okay? And then the person dropping it has to be the same person each time as well. So you can't decide that you're going to do the first one and then you're going to ask your sister or brother to drop the second one, okay? So it has to be the same person dropping, and then you have to drop it from the same height every time, okay? So you can't decide to just hold your arm up in the air. Sorry, I'm just getting some glue tack. You can't just decide to hold your arm in the air and then drop it, and then the second time you're going to stand on a chair and do it, because it's not going to be from the same height every single time. Okay, so let's just recap. So we have our independent variable, so what you're going to change each time, and in this case it's our materials. What are we going to measure, and what is our control variable to make sure that we have a fair test. Okay, so what you're going to do now, either you can, there's a slide, it's about page 15 I think, and you are going to fill out your independent, your dependent and your controlled variables. So what you're going to change, what you're keeping the same, what you're going to measure, and then fill those out, either copy them into your book or there is a sheet if you want to print it out. And then once you've done that, I want you to write your prediction. So what do you predict will happen? Which parachute do you think will have the most air resistance and which one will fall the slowest? So do you think paper will have the most air resistance? Do you think plastic will have the most air resistance? Or do you think cloth will have the most air resistance and therefore is the best material to use for a parachute? So I'm going to give you some time to do that, have a think. You can watch the video back if you want, and then I will be back in another video in part 2 of the session, and I am actually going to do the investigation as well, and we're going to see what happens. So if you do print out the sheet, at the bottom there is there's a little box to complete your results. Don't do that yet, because obviously I haven't done the investigation yet, so don't do that yet. Okay, so I hope this video was useful. Look back over the PowerPoint, look back over the video if you're not sure. So start thinking about your variables and start thinking about your prediction, and I will see you in part 2 of the session. So see you in a bit.